everyone. I'm Maritza Barone and welcome to my podcast, Things You Can't Unhear. As a presenter with a focus on wellness, I have interviewed very many health professionals in my time and heard stories that have opened my eyes about the world we live in today. But I found the best bits that I take home with me and the things I heard that have changed my life are usually when the recording shuts off and we can talk in length behind the scenes. And that's the information that I want to share with you on this podcast.
Ruby Warrington is a British writer, author, and thought leader currently living in New York. She's the founder of The Numinous, a cosmic lifestyle platform, and the founder of a movement called Sober Curious, to which she has written a book, held events, and most recently launched a podcast about. The Sober Curious movement offers an eye-opening new way to think about our relationship with alcohol and reveals the benefits that come from unlearning the habit of drinking and embracing the choice of sobriety. Hi, Ruby. Thanks for being on the show.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Now, we've got a bit of an epic time difference between Melbourne and New York.
We do indeed.
5 p.m. there, am I right?
That's right. And I can never work it out. I just can't get my head around the time difference between where you are and where I am.
Well, it's pretty big. It's 7 a.m. here, so we're doing quite well to be linked up.
Yes. Thank you for making this happen. I'm really excited to chat with you.
Now, I haven't read your Sober Curious book yet, but I have been an avid listener of your Sober Curious podcast and have been following your journey for a little while now. And it's quite intriguing and something I stumbled over after very honestly scrolling Instagram with a slight hangover one morning. And I'd noticed
many of us have, no doubt.
I know. And I noticed this hashtag Sober Curious. And I was like, shall I say it sparked my curiosity? So
I love it.
Must have gotten me at a weak moment. Now, I know you've not had a huge dependency on alcohol, nor labeled yourself an alcoholic. What made you question your relationship with it in the first place and kickstart your curiosity about sobriety?
When I first started questioning and getting sober curious, as I put it, it was about 8 or 9 years ago. And I was drinking very much on a par with all of my peers. I'm British, although I live in New York now, as you can hear. And like Australia, there's a very kind of like boozy sort of drinking culture in the UK, as many people may be familiar with. So I was drinking on exactly the same level, if not less than many of the people I was drinking with. But that still meant I was drinking 4 to 5 nights a week. And a couple of those nights, it would be pretty heavy drinking. And it was not at all uncommon. And it's funny now I look back and just think, wow, I was actually drinking so much. But when I was in it and my tolerance was relatively high, it didn't feel like a huge amount, and it certainly didn't look like what I would have classed then as alcoholic drinking, because what I thought of as alcoholic drinking or problem drinking was, needing a drink first thing in the morning and getting the DTs when I wasn't able to get a drink, that sort of thing. And that definitely wasn't my story at all. But yeah, like I said, looking back, I now can see what an incredible toll drinking was taking on my life, even at that regular kind of like social drinking level. And it really manifested for me in a period of very intense anxiety, or at least I was going through a very anxious period. I mean, just because I was in a high pressure job, lots and lots of deadlines, lots of work on my plate, and then kind of below the surface and sort of unresolved family stuff, as many of us also have, that I wasn't really addressing and didn't really know how to address. And all of it had manifested in this kind of a lot of anxiety that I was feeling. And I really began to notice how if I had a big night out, the anxiety would just be back 10 times worse. And I began to not be able to ignore how my hangovers were now coming laced with this what felt like crippling anxiety, and really began to question to what extent my drinking was actually causing my anxiety, not just exacerbating my, the stress that was kind of already present in my life, but to what extent was alcohol layering even more on top? And that was where my questioning started. And the questioning quickly became slightly more existential in tone. It was like, wow, why is it that we all drink so much? Why is it so unusual to step out of that what I now call, dominant drinking culture and make a different choice. Why is it that if I say I'm not drinking one night, I'm ruining everybody else's night, So the questions started, there just seemed like there were so many questions. And that is what I call getting sober curious, when you start actually, for me, a lot of those questions in the beginning were almost subconscious. It took me a long time to actually vocalize any of them out loud, or even acknowledge to myself that I was asking questions, because the thought of removing alcohol, if that was the answer to many of these questions, or, if I was really going to answer many of my questions honestly, I was going to have to quit drinking for a while. Then that seemed like, oh, well, how on earth do I do that? Because it just is so everywhere. So that's when the journey began. And like I said, it's been about an 8-year process getting me to this point. The book came out in December last year.
Wow.
And tells pretty much my story, along with sharing all of the information that I have garnered along the path, and the way that I answered all those questions for myself.
It is really interesting, and there are so many questions that come from it. And when we're kids and we grow up, we see adults drinking around us all the time, whether it's at home, out at restaurants, in movies. There's no real option in hiding it, and it just becomes a natural thought to think, once we hit legal drinking age, or before in most cases, we're just going to start drinking alcohol. But does it have to be a given? Like, I only have one friend in my whole friendship group who has never had a drink. Only one.
Right. I'm amazed you even have one, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think it's so rare to meet anyone who's never had a drink, unless it's, maybe for religious reasons. But yeah, it's so rare to meet someone who hasn't ever been part of that dominant drinking culture.
It's funny. I met up with her the other day, and I told her I was interviewing you, and I said to her, you're actually the only person that I know she's never had a drink, never been interested to have a drink. And I asked her why, and she just said she's got things to do. She's not interested. And it can be such a time waster.
Oh my goodness. They don't call it getting wasted for nothing.
That's true. So when you did make that decision, and I don't know what your relationship to alcohol is, whether you are completely sober all the time or not, but when you did make that decision to cut down or stop, how did your friendship groups change?
I don't describe myself as sober, because the word sober to me has very strong ties to the recovery community, to AA, to 12-step programs. And I have so much respect for what happens in those programs, and so much respect for the path of people who found their ways there, that I don't really use the word sober to describe myself. And I also don't drink alcohol. Okay. And I also don't have any hard and fast rules about that. It's a daily choice for me not to, which means that there may be an occasion, a random occasion, where there is an opportunity to drink, and I think, well, this would be an appropriate substance to partake in right now. But in judging based on the experience of the past couple of years, that maybe happens once or twice a year. Yeah. So it's really just not really part of my daily life anymore. I don't really think about it, although I talk about it all the time because of my book, but I don't think about like whether or not I'm going to have a drink, because it's just off the table for me in general. I think that our friendships actually are constantly evolving, and we'll often find ourselves gravitating more towards certain groups or spending more time with certain people at different times in our lives, depending where we're at. I mean, it happens when someone has kids. That's like a really obvious one. Like, I don't have children, and most of the people who I used to be really friendly with who have children, we just don't really spend that much time anymore because our lives are very different. And it's a similar thing that happens when you opt out of the drinking culture. Certain friendships where that was the main activity that you bonded over will naturally fade away, and others will endure and perhaps even become stronger and closer because you'll find different ways to bond. And it actually, I mean, it's a very good barometer of how much your friendship or any kind of a relationship, it could be with a romantic partner as well, is purely based on alcohol. And if you remove the substance and there's nothing really to talk about, then okay. And I would say that, there have been some friendships that have sort of fallen by the wayside, but for the large part, most of my friendships remain intact. I think it was interesting for me. My sober curiosity really kind of kicked into high gear after I moved to New York from London. And that was for multiple reasons. One of them being that as much as America and New York certainly have a very kind of like heavy drinking cultures, and New York's very social, for example, and so many people go to multiple events in one night. There's not the same, it's not the sort of same every day at every occasion. As soon as you finish work, you have a glass of wine kind of culture that we have in the UK and also in Australia. I think it's much more kind of hard and fast binge drinking when it happens here in the US.
Yeah.
For example, I really found it interesting when I first moved here, how at dinner, people, if you'd go out for dinner, people would order wine by the glass, whereas in the UK, if there was more than one of you dining, it would be a bottle of wine.
Or a vase.
No questions asked, right? Exactly. Yeah. So for me, it coincided and there was a natural shifting. I was meeting a lot of new people and forming a lot of new friendships as a sober, curious person when I moved to New York. And the friendships that have endured in the UK, I now just see people for coffee, or we'll meet, you know, when I go back to visit, we'll do more daytime things. But a lot of people's lives have moved on anyway. You know, people who have been having kids are possibly not drinking as much because of that as well. So, you know, we have different ways to bond. But yeah, it's the most common question that people ask, because obviously for most of us who drink, it's about socializing. It's interwoven into our social lives. And so it is the most common thing. How am I going to manage all those questions from people? Am I going to feel like an outsider? And I think just entering into it with an open mind and expecting the best possible outcomes is a good way to approach it.
Yeah, that's so true. Why do you think as society we need alcohol, or we think we need alcohol? I know people use it to have more fun, drop their inhibitions, forget their stress and so on. Why do you think we are so dependent on it?
It's such a huge question, and there are many different ways into it. First and foremost, you could just say it's conditioning. You know, like you said, from the word dot, from the moment from the age we're old enough to really understand, we just see alcohol and drinking as something that people do. We're taught to associate it with celebration, with commiseration, with being a grown-up, with dating, with any situation that's not a work situation or a driving situation is a potential drinking situation. And so it's deeply, deeply conditioned into us. But then you could also say, well, how much of that conditioning is a result of multi-billion-dollar marketing campaigns ensuring that we see alcohol that way? You know, there's definitely a lot of money in the alcohol industry, and a lot of money is spent on making sure that we continue to believe that we need alcohol in all of our social situations and interactions. But then I think on a different level, you know, we're really trained in a way to measure our value and our worth by our productivity and our work. Whereas as humans, we need, I think, to balance the time that we work with equal amounts of rest and play and joy and daydreaming, and yet not much value is placed on those. And so I think when I think about, you know, the times that we drink, it is literally any time we're not working. And I think we actually don't really know how to relax, because there's not much value placed on that in society. We're seen if you think about it, like taking time out to relax, to kick back, just to kind of be, it's often seen as lazy or slacking. And so I feel like we need to kind of like switch off that inner critic with alcohol to almost give ourselves permission to switch off and relax. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah. That well, but it just seems like we don't really, we're trained to work hard, be productive, do a good job, contribute something to the world. And yet we need to kick back and relax and do nothing. And so we almost like rely on alcohol to enable that in a way, I think.
What was your process over the 8 years to reduce the drinking and eliminate alcohol out of your life?
I started committing to sort of longer and longer periods of total abstinence, going from like a couple of weeks to a month to a couple of months to a few months. And a big part of that was during times when I wasn't drinking, making sure I still went to or did all the things that I would normally drink at, but just as a non-drinker. So that I could prove to myself that in any of those situations, think weddings, big birthday parties, holidays, I didn't actually need alcohol. And I also made a very conscious choice to focus primarily, if not entirely, on all of the things I wanted to bring into my life and all the things I wanted to create time and space for and all the things I wanted to cultivate, and not focus on what I was cutting out. Again, like, you know, it's a mindset shift. I think a lot of the time when we think about even the word abstinence or abstain, it comes with this kind of sense of austerity, or like I'm denying myself something. So rather than think about that, I was focused on, wow, it feels fantastic never to have a hangover. Wow, I love the fact that I'm getting 8 hours really great sleep every night. Wow, I love the fact that my eyes even look bigger and kind of clearer. And I'm loving the fact that I'm learning how to be vulnerable and intimate with people without needing this kind of numbing substance to get me there. And really focusing on all the positives I was experienced as a result of not drinking. So that, you know, I began to desire all of that way more than I desired a drink.
I love that. That is such really great advice. And it's so important to really focus on the positive. How do you feel like your life has changed, or your career even has changed in that process of not wasting time with hangovers and being so focused?
Well, I do work a bit too much. But having said that, I have so much time for what I'm passionate about, and I'm so aware, and I feel so confident and okay with cutting out and stopping doing things I'm no longer feeling passionate about. Right. I mean, I've been mega productive. I've had 3 books out in the past 2 years, which is pretty good. And I've got an idea for the next one bubbling, and I'm planning to write my proposal for that in August. So
wow, you are working a lot.
So that's kind of taken off. I've launched 2 podcasts.
So you've replaced one thing with another. Do you think as we do you think we do that though as society? Do you think we generally find an alternative not a substance, but an alternative something? Maybe it's exercise, maybe it's something good for us, or work even, to replace that time we spent.
We do. It's an alternative behavior. In fact, I think I read something the other day about, there is some science behind that, you know, to break a habit, you almost have to create a new habit to put in its place. And my work habit is something that I'm definitely currently reviewing. I'm planning to take 2 months off from everything in July and August, and just spend some family time and do a bit of traveling, and sort of really touch base again with my big why, like why am I doing everything I'm doing? So on a productivity level, like, I'm so thrilled that the response to Sober Curious, this book, has been so huge, and people are really resonating with it. So I feel like the work I'm doing is definitely doing some good in the world, which is really satisfying. And I think the other important thing to note is that my relationships have just feel so much deeper, more intimate, more connected. And that goes for my relationship with my husband, my relationship with my mother and my brother, to friendships, you know. I think, like many of us, I always thought that alcohol was that kind of connective glue that helped us bond on a deeper level, or kind of let down our inhibitions with each other. But I've really realized that actually, when you can have vulnerable and intimate conversations and experiences with people when you're not drinking, that's when the bonding really happens on a much deeper level. So I'm just experiencing a deeper level of connection to others, and also to myself, like just really learning how to understand and appreciate all of my different feeling states as a part of me, and all having something valuable for me, even the uncomfortable ones, you know. So yeah, it's the impact has been huge on every area of my life, really.
So what do you believe is the biggest effect of alcohol on us as a society long term?
Well, I mean, I do think, someone asked me recently, you know, what do you think is the biggest benefit of not drinking? And there are so many slightly more superficial ones. And I honestly think the biggest benefit is that we get back in touch with our feelings. You know, there's so much more people, there are so many more people talking openly now about their mental health and emotional well-being, and the importance of addressing like the root causes of what's stressing us and what's causing us anxiety, rather than just kind of like suppressing it, whether it's with alcohol, whether it's with other drugs, whether it's with prescription drugs or whatever, you know, or overworking or social media or any of these things. And I think that actually as a society, the more we can really connect to the sources of our anxiety and our depression, the more we can actually, well, it's actually only then can we really begin to work together to come up with some lasting and sustainable solutions to some of the bigger issues that we're facing as well. You know, the things that impact us personally, but that are actually impacting our world. So I think the implications of more people getting comfortable with being uncomfortable are actually really, really huge. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely, absolutely. I like that, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, and it just for a moment. It's not forever, right? It's just for a period of time.
Well, it's interesting, and this is something I actually was having the conversation with my husband. In my first book, there's a whole chapter about yoga, and the chapter's head is called Confessions of a Reluctant Yogi, because I found it so hard to get into it. I found it so boring. I found it so painful. I didn't think it was doing my body any good. Like, it wasn't torching calories. So I was like, this isn't exercise. So it took me forever to get into it. And I think many people have that experience. But I actually was saying to my husband, I was like, I don't think anyone who once you hear someone saying, oh yeah, I'm getting what yoga is about now, I'm actually starting to enjoy it. I'm like, aha, they're not going to be able to continue doing things that are bad for them. They're not going to be able to continue numbing out from stuff anymore. Because I think that what yoga teaches us, and yoga is a whole philosophy and a way of life. It's not just about, you know, the physical practice. What yoga teaches us is that whatever we are feeling and experiencing will pass. You know, it's kind of a Buddhist philosophy, I suppose, as well. But it's like, whatever we're feeling, if we can just stay in it and stay focused and stay centered, it will pass, and we're going to move into a different, more easeful like phase, you know? And I think that that's a really great metaphor for what we can experience when we quit drinking, or when we quit whatever it is that stops preventing us from being present. It might be dating apps for someone else. It might be, you know, TV series for someone else, or it might be work, and it is work for many of us. But when we can actually get okay with being present with what comes up, when we don't have that distraction, we can learn so much from it, even though in the moment it might be excruciatingly uncomfortable.
This too shall pass, right?
Exactly. That is exactly it. And that's a great metaphor for, like, for example, just on a really kind of surface level, being the only one at a party who's not drinking, feeling the deep discomfort when you first get there, and everyone's got a little bit of social anxiety and everyone's a little bit edgy and waiting for that first drink to kind of like take the edge off, picking up on everyone else's feelings as well as your own. And then an hour in and everyone else has had a couple of drinks, and you're like, oh, we're all just in a room together talking like this. Oh, this is actually okay. You know?
Yeah, it's not too bad after all. And
you're like, oh, I can actually just leave, and that's okay.
Well, it's probably okay up until about midnight, and then you got to get out of there.
Yes. There comes a point, it's really funny. I've been on several benders when I haven't been drinking, and there's definitely a point where it's almost like a switch has been flicked, and it's like, okay, you all are not really here anymore.
Got to go now.
So I might as well leave, because you all have gone somewhere else.
Well, I'm a mum. I've got two girls who are 9 and 7, and I sort of want your advice on how, as parents, you would introduce the idea of alcohol into their lives, because there is no hiding it. As I said earlier, it's everywhere. It's in movies, whether it's not at home in front of them, it's around. And I don't know if you have advice on how you would do it as your future self with children, or how you would introduce alcohol to your children's lives.
I think the most important thing is how you model it.
I love those New York sounds behind you, by the way.
Can you hear that?
I love it.
Siren's going, yeah. I mean, I think it's like with so many things, how you model it and your behavior around it will be how your children perceive it, right? So yeah, how you're talking about it, how you're consuming it. It's interesting, isn't it? Like, you know, I've shared this story a few times. Like, I think when I was a kid, my parents felt they were doing the responsible thing by the time I was aged 8 or 9 and asking questions. What is that? What's wine? Letting me have a sip, telling me what it was, letting me sit at the dinner table with the adults. By the time I was 12, maybe giving me a small glass with some water in it. And I think they felt they were doing the responsible thing, which was not making it some kind of secret grown-up thing that I would develop this kind of, you know, extra special desire around and binge on when I reached my teens. And I didn't binge on it when I reached my teens. I was always kind of like, take it or leave it. It was actually only when I came into the left college and moved into the kind of career world, and I had a lot of nerves and performance anxiety and imposter syndrome, I suppose, that I then found alcohol as a way to medicate in my career. I don't have kids, but I think it's like, that would be my advice. Just think about, just be really, really cognizant of how the behavior around alcohol that you are modeling, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
With every action you take, you're sort of programming their little brains, aren't you? So
absolutely. They just, they just model what we do, I suppose. So
exactly.
that comes with everything. So what is your aim for the Sober Curious movement going forward? And where are you taking this?
Well, my big mission, and I've worked this out as I've been doing my promotion for the book. It didn't really come to me until I started talking about it with more people. I think my big mission is really to make it as normal not to drink as it is to drink, so that people genuinely do have that choice as to whether they want to become a drinker or not, you know, whether they want to engage in the dominant drinking culture or not, because at the moment it really isn't a choice. Like what I just shared with the way I was introduced to alcohol, the assumption was, well, she's a human. There's alcohol in the world. She's going to be a drinker. Like, it was just an assumption. There was no kind of question that wouldn't be part of my life or part of my world or something that I did. And I'm not suggesting that the opposite, which is, you know, ban it, make it illegal, it works either. I think that alcohol is here. It's a substance. It will be in the world. And wouldn't it be great if we actually genuinely got to choose whether it was something we want to engage in or not, you know?
Without having to feel bad or alienated.
Exactly. And without having to mark ourselves. It's deeply uncomfortable, and it goes against all of our biology to mark ourselves as an outsider or to opt out of, you know, an opportunity to fit in, because that's all we really, really want, is to fit in and be accepted and to be part of the gang and part of the tribe, to feel safe in that way. And so to make ourselves willingly mark ourselves as other or an outsider is very, very difficult. And so to not have to ever reach that point, for it to be just as normal, no questions asked. You're not drinking, fine, that's fine. Like, just no questions asked.
Yeah,
that would be my ultimate goal. And where am I taking it? I'm really loving doing the podcast, so definitely want to continue with that.
Who have you had on the podcast so far?
This week's episode, my most recent episode, is with someone called Holly Whitaker, who runs an online sobriety school called Tempest. I've had Jen Batchelor, who's the founder of an alcohol-free brand called Kin Euphorics. I had an amazing women's empowerment coach called Africa Brooke, a fantastic model and influencer called Eves Matthew East, and also, last but not least, Moby, the musician, was my first guest.
I did listen to that one a couple of times, actually. That was intriguing.
Very, yes. He's very smart, and definitely had some interesting things to say. And all of these people are non-drinkers, but for many different reasons. So my goal, again, with the podcast is to show that there are so many different paths or so many different reasons a person might be a non-drinker. It doesn't have to have looked like drinking to the extent where you have a horrible rock bottom and are forced to stop, you know?
Absolutely. And I love that you're doing this, and I love that you're giving people choice to make their own decisions without being separated or alienated, as I said earlier. So well done. Now I'm finishing my podcast these days with a bit of a pay it forward scenario. And for you to suggest someone who inspires you in daily life that has something powerful to share with our listeners and that we need to stand up and listen to. So I don't know if you're reading books at the moment or you've listened to something recently, or there's someone in your life that you absolutely are completely blown over and inspired by. We'd love to know.
I would love to nominate my long-term collaborator and best friend, Alexandra Roxo. She's an incredible transformational coach. She and I have been leading retreats together for the past 3 years. And she has a way of making her life and her healing process into art. And she shares such beauty with the world in terms of her words and in terms of her work. And she has helped so many women to heal from really deep-seated trauma associated with sexual abuse and just, I don't know, she's kind of fearless and in the healing space she's a breath of fresh air and like realness, you know. So
yes.
Her name's Alexandra Roxo, and that's just that her Instagram handle is that also.
Oh, she sounds phenomenal. And is she someone who is following the Sober Curious movement with you at the moment as well?
Indeed she is. And this is the other interesting thing, like the people I'm closest to now, you may notice, anyone who gets sober curious, is sober curious, you may notice a slight ripple effect. Again, like the way that we model to our kids, I feel like by our behavior and our choices, we're actually modeling to everyone we come into contact with. And it's really interesting how all of the people I'm close to now are also sober curious, and many don't drink at all. And Alexandra is definitely one of those. And it's not like I ever stood over her and pointed a finger and said, you have to stop drinking, but purely by, you know, modeling this as an option, it got her curious, and she's discovered that she really enjoys life without hangovers too.
Well, look at you, one person at a time, changing the world.
That's the way we do it. That's literally the way we do it, though. I mean, it truly, truly is. It's the only way it can happen. So yeah.
Oh, well done. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Ruby. You can catch Ruby on her social media at Ruby Warrington on Instagram, and also follow what she's up to on thenuminous.com and her other website, rubywarrington.com. I'd love to hear what you thought of this episode and the Sober Curious movement. And if there's someone in your life who you think would love to listen to this, please share. And of course, don't forget to just subscribe to the show. Thank you so much, Ruby, for being here. I really love what you're doing, and hats off to you completely for pushing forward and giving us all freedom of choice.
Thank you so much for having me and for helping me share this message too.
You're very welcome.